Usually I start off with like this fancy intro, always say, I'm here with Steve, everybody that's listening. But at the same time, I want to change it up and I want to say, because you've been on, it's the second time now. What do you feel like talking about? What's going on in your life? What's been on your mind, I would say?
Look, Rob, yeah, thanks for having me back on the show. It's a real pleasure and great to see you again. Look, mate, unfortunately, what's been on my mind is Greece. It's Sparta. I just recently released another episode yesterday, and this one was delving into the educational systems that the Spartans had. So unfortunately, there's nothing cool or sexy on my brain. It's all about boys getting whipped and different levels of female education in the ancient Greek society. It's been a profound learning curve. Actually, that's where I'm at the moment.
Is a better education system than what we have today. Cause look, the education system has mistreated me and probably like, I didn't get math for 5 years. Like by the time I hit my senior year or junior year, like towards the end of it, they were like, you're not going to have enough math credits to graduate high school. And I'm like, well, that's not my fault if you never gave me the classes to do so. So they put me like in this alternative education room and all I had to do was show up and I passed. So I didn't do anything like the two teachers in the classroom were coaches. One was a baseball coach and one was a basketball coach. And they're like, you're the only one in here that's not supposed to be in here. Like everybody in here was smoking cigarettes in the bathroom, doing horrible things, just being outright. Like one kid stabbed another kid. So they're like, what do you want to do? You can sit on your phone all day or just go take a lap. And they're like, I would take a lap, come back. They're like, Rob, that was 5 minutes. Why don't you go for the rest of the day and just walk around school? So I would just start scrolling through, looking up like information on my phone, looking up graphic universe comics where I started learning a lot about mythology and things of that sort. And I was like, man, like, is it better? Like if I was going to be whipped into submission, would I learn math better? I don't know.
Well, you'd either learn it or you wouldn't, one way or the other, that's for sure. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. Like, we get an impression over here in Australia of what American schools are like from TV before we, really are cognizant about what school really is. Shows like Fast Times at Ridgemount High and Saved by the Bell. And you go to school thinking, oh, it's great. Everybody's got these lockers. You don't have to wear uniforms or anything like that. It just seems like this really casual environment. And yeah, you get guys smoking cigarettes in the toilets there, and it looks like there might be some schools with metal scanners, and that's a little bit weird. But going to school in Australia is vastly different. Most schools, all schools, as far as I know, have uniforms. There's no locker culture, so you don't see people sort of opening up a locker and looking at their own little personal effects in there. It's a very regimented and I guess probably primarily English fashion. But the Spartans, the only thing that they really shared in common with our schooling, I suppose, is in that it was state sponsored and it was compulsory. But it's a little bit different for the boys and the girls, and the girls isn't as well attested as well as the boys. But for a boy, for example, you would probably, if you passed the initial test of being considered fit for the raising into Spartan society at birth there, they used to have to take the babies in front of a council of the elders, and they'd inspect them over for any sort of defects or abnormalities, or even if they shied away in fear. And the legend goes that these babies that were considered not qualified for Spartan society would be taken to a place called the apotheke, which literally in Greek means the place of discarding, and they would be dumped into a cavern. And I've seen this cavern in real life, and although there have been human remains found in the bottom of the cavern, they aren't of children, but the place itself has this real dark and brooding sense about it. It's a place where you look at it, you can tell there's been some evil going on there. But from there, they live a relatively normal life till 7, where the child, the boy, would be taken from his family unit and would not really be free of Spartan law until the moment he either died on the battlefield or died at a ripe old age, whatever that might be in ancient Greece. He was basically trained, conditioned, and judged for his entire life after the age of 7 from there. So in that relation, we could wag school, we could play hooky, I think you might call it in America. Not the case in Sparta. If that happened, at the very least, you would be beaten, whipped, and flogged. At the very worst, you would be banished from society. Would never have an opportunity to be one of the full Spartan citizens when you got older.
So I spent the past couple of days listening to your podcast. I made it all the way up to episode 20. From number 1, I think it's called Yoke is the one I stopped on, or I fell asleep to. It's strange talking to you because I'm not going to ask you like legit questions. What are your moral thoughts on all this stuff too? Because like what you just said about discarding a baby that might not seem fit to be a Spartan. Because I'm conflicted, because I have an empathetic side to me where I'm like, I know I would be that discarded person. But, it's funny. I was just watching Thor Ragnarok, And that island that they're stuck on, it's all about people that were misfits, that were just like cast out, that nobody wanted them. So it's like an island of misfit toys. And it goes to the bigger story of the island of misfit toys. Like, if, I probably would fit in that category of maybe a misfit toy, being rejected by a lot of things that would be claimed as normal. But I'm like, are those the innovators? It all really depends on who you are. I mean, we watched in the 300 movie, the deformed guy that was like, he couldn't lift his shield above his head. I think there's this eugenics thing. And anytime you talk about eugenics, it boils down to Hitler or boils down to that basic concept of idea. But the idea that you want to create a community of people that are strong to breed stronger genetics to make sure you have this elite race, which the Spartans did do. But can it be managed? Can it be something that it's not something you're born with, but it can be something that you're taught. Like, for instance, it is 30 fucking degrees where I'm at right now. It is cold, but back then in Sparta, there was snow on the ground and they were in underwear. That was it. They did not fear the cold. They did not, get so sensitive to it, because you can train that out of somebody. People that live in Alaska for a long period of time and then move here, they're used to the cold. They grew up in it. Their sensors are kind of null to it all. So I'm wondering, like, is the concept of judging a baby, seeing if it's Spartan material or if it should be discarded, would the discarded person be looked down on less in our eyes based on the concept? I mean, at least in your opinion, based on the concept of maybe that would make them stronger. Because imagine feeling rejected. Imagine your own society, the people that are supposed to teach you to make these excellent warriors, said you're not fit to be a warrior. You didn't pass their inspection test, which is all, like, if we look at like what an inspection test would be back then, and even now, it's a perspective. You could have one, like, how many movies do we see where the guy goes up and he's looking at the baby, but he knows the father because his father's his brother and it's his nephew that he's looking at. And he goes, oh, this baby's not fit to be a Spartan, but it's your nephew. So you're like, I don't want to cast him out to die. He's a-okay. He's a-okay. And then people start noticing as the kid's growing up that he's not an okay Spartan. It's all the perspective of why you're casting that person out. So it's like, same thing with our education system. A person that gets awarded medals or all this, it's all the perspective from the teacher's perspective. The kid might be getting A's on his papers, but does he have common sense? Nobody ever looks at that level of intelligence. It's all about a curriculum, and it's all about a template that we're working off of, because the template works for most of the population. But as we know nowadays, that template is a base cover, but it doesn't go any farther than that. It doesn't go into the kids that might be advanced, but in a different category, a different section. They might fail every single test they ever take. But if you give that kid a book to read on his own, would he excel past everybody else?
It's a good point, and I think it's probably something that you figured out over your time interviewing a lot of people, that although they call it common sense, it isn't that common at all. It should be called uncommon sense, I guess. But to go back to your original question, I think any proper study of any ancient culture needs to be a study of warts and all. And in my recent episode that I released yesterday, obviously dealing with Spartan education of the boys and the girls, I had to touch on some things that are considered very sensitive in this day and age. One was misogyny. The other was pederasty, which is often conflated with pedophilia. But the two, there's a nuanced difference there. But in this day and age, people would consider it splitting hairs. And finally, child abuse. And those topics, although delicate, to leave them out, and I think to leave anything out of history's a lesson. See, it tells us what we did wrong in the past. And it tells us what we're going to get right in the future as well. And if we start doctoring it and trimming it down to be a picture of what we want to do, or what we'd like to see, we run the risk of repeating those same mistakes. But with Sparta, it's a funny one. See, there's two Spartas, and I say this in one of my very first episodes. There's the Sparta that was, and then there was the Spartan mirage. Now, because most of the sources we have on Sparta were people that lived outside of Sparta, mainly Athenians, who had every want to portray Sparta in a very negative light. But there's also, the mirage was fed into by the Spartans themselves, because just imagine it. If you were coming up against these guys on the battlefield and you thought, hang it down, these guys are guys that murder babies, for example, that fear in your belly. would naturally increase. And I think the Spartans were really keen to perpetuate that image. But if I was to answer honestly, I don't think that they discarded babies. I mean, uh, the exposure of deformed infants in ancient Greece was a very well attested thing that happened. Even Aristotle himself recommended it in that sort of situation. So I think in that regard, Sparta was no different than other Greek cities. But Sparta was very, very short on manpower. They had at best 8,000, at their greatest peak, 8,000 fighting soldiers. They were severely outnumbered by at least 10 to 1 by their enslaved population. And if you take an Athenian city body, which was anywhere between 40 to 50,000 fighting citizens, the Spartans had a very, very small citizenry to call their army up from. I don't think that they were discarding babies just because they were shying away in fear and things like that. It just wouldn't make any sense to me at the end of the day when they needed every soldier they possibly could to get on the front lines to be able to defend their territory and suppress their enslaved class of helots.
Well, in the Spartan mindset was like a lot with our wars down here, for instance. Like they say that like we might like a German tank was worth 5 American tanks, but we always had 6 because it was like we were like McDonald's pumping out these, weapons and pumping out all these things so fast that yes, theirs was more time and more effort put into theirs, and it was probably one could take down a bunch of ours, but we had so many that we overpowered them. That was kind of like the mindset is like, if you're going to create a tribe, let's say I put you in as the leader, okay, you got the conch shell to summon your tribe and everything. You're going to look at like, okay, even though he can't be used for this, we're going to try and push him over into this category, somewhere to find a place where he's useful, because everybody needs to put in a hand. Everybody needs to consider contributing into the group. But the Spartan mindset was the main thing on their head was war, was conquering, was trying to be the best and prove that you are the best. So anything that wasn't up to the best quality standards or didn't have the potential to be the best, it's best to discard it and side it away. The craziest thing I never even thought of was all these cities that they were capturing. They would sleep in these cities around the people that they captured, and they had no fear whatsoever of these people killing them in their sleep. And I'm like, that would be my biggest fear. Have you ever, like during lockdown, especially when domestic violence and all this stuff increased, how many people were afraid that their loved one was going to come in with a fucking butter knife and slice their neck open over a stupid argument about the beef stew not being cooked properly? And it's like you look at these people that burn down somebody's house, then they go and whatever they're staying at their uncles and aunts, they go and live at that person's house that they conquered, and then they're sleeping soundly, like on a straw pillow or something, with no fear that this person's going to rise up because they know how strong they are and they have no fear of anything whatsoever. That's a very, very rare breed of people that you would have to be able to breed that way or make even, I think, maybe if I'm going to be generous, a 0.5% of the population doesn't have a fear in anything, can come up to any challenges. A lot of those people get thrown into the military. That's why there were so few Spartans, because they're whatever their requirements, their standards were so high. We have high standards now when it comes to like, you want to, if you're going to marry somebody, you want to make sure they have a good credit system. You want to make sure that, they have a car, they can shower properly, they're clean, they're all these different things. There's all these pegs in your mind that you have to go down. So it all depends on who your leader is. So if you ask them the question of, you got to start your own tribe, everyone's going to have different standards. Everyone's going to have different qualities. I spent most of my life being a minority and being discarded aside, being told I wasn't worth it, or all these other types of things. So I gained the perspective of understanding where that position comes from. So when I hear something like this, like discarding someone with or anomaly or a disformed figure or something like that, I look at it like there's a potential chance to take that and use it as a strength, as such as becoming stronger or starting your own division of things. I mean, tribes were starting and being disbanded all the time back then. Who's to say, just because one society, and it works for today's times too, how many times does someone take the worst rejection news and considers it fact and written to stone that they're worthless? Instead of taking it that you're worthless, take it as, just because you don't see me that way doesn't mean I don't have that potential inside of me. And I think that's the best of what 300 was kind of trying to show with this guy when you were telling him, raise a shield. It was in the mindset of like, you're not going to, the shield aspect was like, if you don't, it's so disrespectful to lose a shield in Spartan history, because of the fact is, you're not just leaving yourself vulnerable, you're also making the army vulnerable, because you are now a weak point. So that means that they can break through, and that's how you get killed. It was all a survival aspect of things. But when he was trying his hardest, you saw he teamed up with the other guys and they killed all the Spartans. It was an aspect of you, doesn't mean you have that potential. Your usage might be somewhere else. And I'm sorry, that was a rant. I didn't mean to do that.
No, by all means. I like your rants. You're a bit of a visionary. It's good. I think you're right when you touch on the sources of rejection and how people might perceive that at the end of the day. And you see it in social media all the times too. And a lot of people say it that you can have 99 good comments and one bad, and that's the one you focus on. But depending on the sort of person you are, have you ever heard of a gentleman by the name of Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, dude, that
Yeah.
guy, I've been listening to him recently, and I see where he's coming from with a lot of things, but I get people are like, you agree with him? I'm like, his points are serious points. And, he's a master of his craft. So,
Mm.
he's not dumb, and people are like, he's an idiot. I'm like, no, it's just, it's wrong against the way society has been going. Society is teaching us to think this one way, and he's
Yeah.
trying to give you the straight bare answer of like everything that you're building up into your mind right now, even though you consider it good, can sometimes go a little bit too far. It's kind of where I get into an argument with some feministic types, because they like to think that, and this just happened recently. So a good thing of what I mean, like when I say the idea of feminist, people think it's like people supporting women. That's what it should be. But they go a little bit too far with it, where they're like, all men need to pay. I don't like that, because this just happened recently with Medusa. People were upset about Medusa. Did you see that trending on Twitter?
Briefly, yeah, of course. And it goes back a long time. Yeah, please continue.
It was about, people started finding out the origin story of Medusa. And I'm like, guys, it's a fucking story. There was no real person with snakes as hair and could turn men into stone. It's a myth. But they're like, it even shows in myth that the man always overpowers and is just this supreme dominant force in this hierarchy. And I'm like, oh my God, guys, like, I get it. I get it. But at the same time, like, they were like, she was raped and then she ran to, I'm like, you guys got to understand, it's a story. I mean, if we start looking at like Moses parting the seas and stuff like that, I mean, there's questionable stuff on that aspect too. And not to go super deep into the religion and all the other stuff of it, but I'm like, it's all like this attack and this thing of everybody's looking for someone to blame, and that's where cancel culture comes in. I've talked about it so much. I'm just like, you can't look at history and try and delete it. It does not work. It's part of our past, but we can learn from it. We can
Absolutely.
understand that our feelings right now of why that was wrong back then is good, that we're thinking of this way, because now we're evolving in our mindset. We're evolving in our capabilities. But you can't just tear up something that happened in 1500 AD. It's not going to work, because you don't have you don't have a DeLorean. You can't go back in time. There's no way.
The DeLorean. Yeah, and look, and nor would you want to. That Medusa one's very, very interesting. I mean, a lot of the Greek myths, a lot of the Greek stories have a little bit of moral inside at the end of the day. But I have looked very deep in the heart of the Medusa story, and I think to myself, my God, what is the point of that story? But I saw a tweet on Twitter by somebody saying something along the lines of uh, prove somewhere where mankind wasn't being harsh towards women in the Medusa story. And my response was simply, see, what happened was when Perseus went to Medusa, he obviously used his polished shield, which was a gift from Athena, to look at her reflection in there so he'd get close to her and then cut her head off. And what happened in the aftermath of him cutting her head off was a Pegasus, so a horse with wings, flew out of the hole,
From
and then a
Gorgon's blood.
giant, yeah. And a giant with a golden sword came out of it again. Now, the giant with the golden sword was Chrysaorus. I think the word literally means giant with a golden sword. You never hear from him again. Pegasus obviously goes on to be part of other myths and a little bit conflated with Perseus too. So my response to the person on Twitter was that, look, it was all a big misunderstanding. Perseus was merely trying to perform a tracheotomy, and things got a little bit out of hand. But nobody really saw the humor in that at the end of the day.
It's funny because that's Clash of the Titans is probably one of my favorite movies. Um, that's why I'm hoping there's a Kraken out there because of that whole, like, that's be so awesome to have some deep sea. But Greek mythology, this is like my area of like where my passion starts to come out because of the aspect of like, I like all those stories. I mean, they all have morals to them. And I think that's the whole point. Like, people take them literally, like Hercules slayed and did all these challenges and, he discarded being a god. But it's like, look at the moral to that. You're given absolute power. You get to join one of the greats, be with your father, for instance, up in the heavens and rule down above all mortal men or all mortal whoever. And you look at it like he denied that whatever gift because he loved someone and he wanted to stay human. He wanted to support the people that, he was there to protect, and he couldn't do that from up there. That's a big decision. If you give somebody, let's say, I'm going to give you the love of your life. She's going to be the best person in your entire world. But then I give you the aspect to be a god and live forever and have ultimate power. Most people, even myself, are going to be like, fuck yeah, let's do the ultimate power thing. But he denied that. And it's like there's a moral to it too. The challenges, the tasks that he had to perform he had to do all these labor challenges. There were aspects of impossible challenges, impossible feats that he overcame. And it was supposed to be impossible sounding because they wanted you to understand that you can do anything if you put your mind to it and you put your heart into it. Like, there's all these deep morals to it, but nobody really analyzes it that way, and it happens too. It happens with me. I get things misconstrued at times when I hear something. I'm like, that seems really dumb. But then it's about looking at that perspective. It's trying to find a deep root to something that might not have deep roots. Like sometimes someone says, like, I saw a butterfly this morning and it was sitting on a flower. That just shows us that life is precious and everything means there's a perfect harmony to the world. Most people go, there's just a butterfly on a flower, because it's trying to find deep meaning into something. And I believe you can find that in all realms of interpretation, like listening and studying folklore, studying all these traditions and looking at things back in ancient civilization days. I look at it like a lot of those ideas that they had, there's stuff we're still coming up on today, but they weren't at conflicts with each other because they understood the bigger fear that there was an enemy out there. And I think that was like the whole point of like why I was getting super into aliens for a while, was like having a bigger enemy to face, because the only time that you're really ever coming together is when there's a war going on. This idea of world peace is not possible because we're always going to try to find conflict, whether we consider war or killing a different type of war than somebody on social media attacking somebody. It's just because everyone thinks so uniquely different, and not everyone is open to a way that somebody thinks. There's always going to be constant fluctuations in wanting to change that person's perspective. And I'm not like any abnormality of a person that's trying to understand anybody's perspective. It's just trying to come to the table clean. It's very, very hard to come to the table clean when you have so much that is told you one way, where you think that person might be an idiot, or that person might be like, I believe in flat earthers now. Like, I just, from hearing one talk to me for so long, it's not saying I think the earth is flat, but listening to their perspective, I'm like, oh, yeah, you got some really good points on some stuff too.
Is that like, yeah, I've always wondered about that. You look at people that are talking about flat earth, and there's QAnon and things like that, and you think, my God, these guys are so possessed by these ideas. And 9 times out of 10, I would just literally write somebody up if they started talking along those lines. But what is at the crux of flat earth theory? Like, where do they really get the meaning? I mean, anybody that's ever been in a plane can see the curvature of the earth. How do they get around these things? What did this person explain to you?
The best rationalization I can tell you is, maybe if I told you, like, imagine, I'm asking you right now to believe 100% in your government, that your government has never done anything wrong to you, has never lied to you, has never hid any information from you that you didn't want to know. You're going to tell me that's bullshit, because for a
That's
fact
bullshit.
that they've hid some stuff from you. And so the idea now is that they're lying to people. That the earth is flat, and every picture that you see is just something that's, it's showing part of a picture. It's not really like there's no evidence that it's round. Everything we see is just what they want us to see. So understanding that, I'm like, this is where we get into a kind of a conspiracy crazy territory, because see, the mind is so malleable. Like, for Spartans, for instance, a good training mechanism was dumping them in harsh environments and having them survive. When your brain hits that survival stance, hits that mode of like, we need to, if we don't move, if we don't fight, if we don't kill, if we don't get food, we're going to die. We're going to die out here. There's nobody that's going to come and save us and say, well, your 30 minutes is up. Good luck. You're going to survive. And here's a really cool, interesting thing that I learned that I wanted to talk to you about was, a lot of people consider like stress is very, very bad. Stress affects your immune system, but did you know it affects it in a positive way?
No, I had actually heard that putting the body under certain heat and cold stress produces certain proteins that can, help stave off infections and things like that.
Well, it's even a layer of the immune system. Like a lot of people are talking about. I was listening to a neuroscientist, and he was talking about how like when stress levels hit your brain, your body raises its awareness levels and your immune system goes up. It actually gets stronger. So actually having a good level of stress, like not so much to where like you cry every time you walk outside, because too much of it can be bad for you, just like too much water can be bad for you. But if your level of stress is at a not too bad, but not too good, it's at a decent normalized level where like an average day of stress, it actually keeps your immune system on alert to protect you from viruses and other types of things. That's when you notice when you take one of those personal me days and you have that day of relaxation where you just want to lay in bed all day, you kind of feel even more like crap because you've let your immune system say there's no alerts, there's no danger, you can rest. Your immune system goes down and shuts off for a little bit, a very low state of rest. And then that's when the infections start to come and your immune system isn't up to protect you from those things. So having a mild sense of stress can actually benefit your immune system. Same thing with being a Spartan back then. Their survival was them trying to find ways to live, trying to find ways to eat, trying to find ways to stay warm or they would die. Our comfortability now has made us so comfortable to the point where we can't really survive basic functionings and we're creating conflicts in very, very simple stuff. If I took anybody from this time period and threw them back then, they wouldn't like you were saying before about, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
of dentist appointments.
yeah.
Think of like just trying to stay warm. Like I would need a fucking jacket. I don't care how bad my obliques are or how fucking ripped I am. I need a jacket. I'm cold. It's snowing out and I have to fight a saber-toothed tiger. I would like to be able to have something to keep me warm, trying to find my best ways to survive, which is what they were doing back then. Back then the conditions were so harsh that you had to adapt to those conditions, such as people in Africa adapting to their environment. And then they come over here like, you have everything. It's like, well, no, we don't. We were missing a lot of stuff. It's like, but and then the example's always Africa. The example's always that because it's a
Yeah.
place that has worse conditions than us. And I'm like, it's conditioning. It's like major conditioning. And I look at like the past and I'm like, I see the perspective in it all. And honestly, some of the stuff they have, I'm like, makes sense. Maybe you would steal less if you had your hand chopped off if you tried to steal something from somebody. I'm just saying.
Well, you certainly steal less if you got caught twice anyway. You'd
Yeah.
have no hands left, But yeah, look, for the Spartans, absolutely. And I think that was part of it. There was a lot of socialization and normalization of their hierarchical structure of society. They wanted to break down those family units and make the person part of the city as a whole. I guess it's an interesting fact that there's no word in ancient Greek for an individual in the private sense. Absolutely had no meaning whatsoever. The city was an organism, the polis was an organism, and as a citizen, you were part of that organism. And if the organisms were sick within the city, then the city itself would be sick. And that was where the concern really lied. But yeah, most definitely for the Spartans, I mean, when they were taken between the ages of 7 to 12, they were given, I think it was one tunic or like a hand woven bit of cloth to wear per year, just the one, whether it was, rain, hail or shine. They were told to go barefoot absolutely everywhere, designed to harden their feet and make them inured to hardship in that regard. And they were fed only the barest of rations, and they were encouraged to steal what they couldn't. That was the idea anyway. And when they were caught for stealing, they were punished very, very severely. They weren't punished for stealing, but they were punished for being caught. And there's an anecdote whereby a boy had been caught stealing a wild fox, which is kind of strange because it was wild, but that story is as it is. And rather than admit to having stolen the fox, the boy kept his mouth shut, and within the folds of his cloak, the fox ate out his entrails. So before you knew it, the boy collapsed dead in front of his accuser, rather than admit to the fact that he actually got caught stealing because so scared he was of the punishment from there. And from the age of 12, they were, I guess, granted a small mercy. They were given a cloak to go along with their tunic. But that's when the real training started. They were subjected to ritualistic beatings in front of all of their peers. If they cried out in pain, not only were they punished even further, but the person that was responsible for their training was punished as well for not instilling the correct amount of manliness in there. Yeah, we've really got things pretty easy these days compared to the Spartans. If we would, any of us, myself, yourself, any people around, would endure those sorts of hardships, we simply wouldn't know what to do with ourselves. For me, the greatest hardship I've had recently was trying to get internet reconnected at a new place that moved in here, and that was an absolute stress. But I can't imagine, being flogged to within an inch of my life just for the very minorest of transgressions. But it certainly bred a very, very hard people within Sparta, and it bred the right kind of people that Greece needed by the time of the Greco-Persian Wars, because if it wasn't for the Spartans and for that regimented training that produced like a well-oiled machine, these mighty warriors, Greece would have had, I think we touched on it last time too, Greece would have had a lot of trouble stopping the Persian advance in those wars.
And it's like, if you look at like people say like, oh, imagine if I went back then, I could totally revolutionize. I would be their king. And it's like, you might have great mindset, or you might die 10 minutes into it when they start saying that you're a wizard or you're using some type of witchcraft. You got to understand, just because their mindset might have been a little bit slow, but in other aspects, their mindset was way more advanced than will probably ever be again. The concept of like, I always say like, the reason why they never fought each other in their own town was because when you have to build a ship all day, you probably don't want to fight. You're just tired of shit. So there's no need to start conflict. But at the same time, the area of survival, even thieving back then, it was all about survival. It was this aspect of how can I try my best to best the next person. There's a thing called linguistical language, which some people have it today, where it's like if you can talk to someone like you're doing like I work a cashier job. I work at a desk, so it's front desk, so we have to work the cashier and stuff like that too. So somebody's like gives me a $20 bill, they'll start talking to you using like neuro-linguistic programming, which is like certain words that'll throw your mind off, and then you're like, what? And then you ended up giving them like like $30 back, and even though they owe you 10, they still owe you money. It's just a way of like trickery, kind of like thieving a little bit, but it's an evolved form of how it used to be back in the day, where someone would rob you or somebody would do something of that sort. It's there's simple tricks where it seems like some people are more advanced than others. You know what I mean? Like they seem more evolved, they seem to have a different understanding, not education wise, but more of a way of surviving. I think those go down from basic instincts. Like we talk about, oh, well, there was Achilles, the great hero. It's like, I think we have modern day Achilles as well. Maybe not in the aspect of sword fighting, but in the aspect of surviving, but in the aspect that like some people are at a level 10. When you look at star athletes like Michael Jordan, they're at a level 10 and you are at like a level 5. And you look at that, like, I think there's people sprinkled all throughout the world that have those sudden capabilities like that too. And I think that, there might be people that never show themselves that have those types of things. It makes me really want to go be able to have time travel capabilities to go back in time and just monitor all these people who was on the cusp of something, who discovered this, who was working on something like this. I just want to talk to somebody from back then and just see what their thoughts were. Like, what did you think about this? Like, what's the belief in the gods? Well, the gods created a system of structure, not out of love and admiration, but out of fear. They kept us wanting to praise and sacrifice to them. And the idea that this superstition that we're going to have great rain, we're going to have great farming, we're going to have pulling this amazing harvest, we're going to have amazing ship travel. We're not too far off from doing that today when we pray to God for winning the lottery. It's not too far off.
Do you think God actually cares about whether we win the lottery or not? It's an interesting one too, rather than praying for world peace, it's like, just let that little ball roll down into the tube so I can win my millions of dollars and all that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, and I think it touches on, on the idea of sacrifice. That was a massive part of any culture in the ancient days, and it's something we still do today to a lesser extent than what they did back then. But just the idea of work, I mean, what you're doing right now is sacrifice. You know, you're giving up your time to have a conversation to me with who knows where it's going to go in the future. But it's all about the sacrifice. You go to your job, you work a few hours, you get some money so that later on down the track you can buy something that to you is more important than the actual work that you get there. And I think that's probably where the meaning in life is actually found. I heard somebody on a podcast the other day mention happiness, and he said, "Look, I don't want to be happy all the time. What I want in life is meaning." And you know, when you're happy, you don't really have any of that sort of meaning in your life whatsoever. You know, like you're just in this state of elation, and you know, it's nothing like, you know, the Christians talk about this eternal happiness. I think to myself, I don't know if I want that. Like, you know, how happy can I be? And eternity is a heck of a long time, but you know, give me responsibility, give me some meaning, you know, give me something to really sink my teeth into. And that's when I'm, I guess, at my happiest. And I suppose that in the future, after, you know, years and years of hard work and dedication and honesty and really trying to be the best person you can, then perhaps you can relax and enjoy a modicum of happiness. But it should be about sacrifice. It should be about what you can do for your fellow man. It should be about, you know, how you can live up to be a model citizen and let that reflect on the people around you, and really be a role model to the people around you in life. You know what I mean?
Even with conflicts, like if you look at Norse mythology, for instance, when the Vikings, before a raid and after a raid, they would celebrate by having a feast in the hall. That's a way
Mm,
of the community coming together, no matter if you just have issues with someone in your town, but it's about connecting, getting drunk with your people that you live around. You know, how many people go to a community hall or go to fucking family bingo unless they're in their 80s? You know what I mean? Like, it's this aspect of like, there's no really sense of connection anymore. And even when they're playing bingo, they're not really paying attention to the person beside them. They're more worried about the person calling out the names and having cards. But it's, yeah. And it's like this aspect of like, maybe, you know, I had a long time ago, I went to school for chemical dependency. So I was trying my best to become like somebody that would help with people that were suffering from opioid addictions. And I had this dream of like this place I wanted to start up, which was like this apartment organization with like maybe 100 and 200 rooms or something like that. And each, I'd have multiple supervisors that would manage each hall. But it would be like these people, be given 6 months to find a job. They'd be given clothes, shelter, and a roommate, someone that connects with the personality traits that you have, so you guys wouldn't be in conflict with each other. Nobody would kill somebody in the middle of their sleep. But you would try after 6 months and have a job, be able to afford the rent there, and then you would continue living there. But it would help you get off your addiction, and it would really be focusing on you as a person, trying to get your life on track. Now, once a night or once a day, we would have one event where we would have a dinner in the town hall. We'd all go out and stairs and eat pizza. Even if they're not in your hall, if they're in another hall, whatever, as long as you're in the apartment building, we'd all hop in a van and go do a bowling night or something. But it's a way of connecting with the people that are around you. You know, this is the importance. Like, I used to hate when neighbors would come over and introduce themselves to me, but now I kind of understand it, and I actually really appreciate that. Like, my buddy moved to a new neighborhood and he had like 12 people come to his house with all these random items of like, here, welcome to the neighborhood, welcome to the neighborhood. And he was like, are we in the fucking 50s? Like, what is going on? Like, I don't know you, but they would introduce themselves. And that's of prior importance, because you want to know who's in your culture, who's in your community. You know,
yeah,
it's not about really having a disagreement or trying to figure out where a person stands politically. It's about
yeah,
trying to understand who this person is, where they come from, have a compassionate thing. And it goes back to like what we talked about. I
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
truly appreciate taxes until I found out that they pay for your fire department. Because how many people do you know in your neighborhood right now that if your house started to burn down, they would come over there with a water hose or something, or try and help you out in the best possible way? Most people nowadays pull out their phone and just take a video and they just go,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry
yeah.
for your loss. That doesn't
They
fucking help me.
probably bring the marshmallows over as well, you know, somewhere to roast,
Yeah.
cheap fire at the end of the day. Yeah, yeah, no, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, even though, you know, at the moment it's daytime in America and it's winter over there, or coming out of, I guess it must be springtime now. Over here it's nighttime and it's coming into autumn. And, you know, we grew up in completely different societies, but the things that we have in common would far outweigh the things that we don't have in common. Yet it just seems to be that people look for these differences and they double down on it. And you know, it's just all bullshit. At the end of the day, all this stuff is just pure background noise. You know, like I think it's almost like it's almost like a curse of the human existence or human condition, that rather than really focus on the things that matter, the stuff that could really make our world a better place, we're worried about, are you blue? Are you red in America? Over here, it's, are you liberal? Are you Labor? Like there's all this just background noise that it really distracts us, I think, from what we really should be focusing on. And the social media element of things is just the biggest misnomer in the world. It's not social at all. It's completely antisocial. There's that much toxicity on there. And don't get me wrong, I use social media for advertising my show, and I'm sure you do the same. And look, you can have some pretty positive experiences on there. But how many times have you, flicked open Twitter and just saw these, these Twitter battles going back and forth from people who've never actually met, who probably have vastly more in common than they don't, but they're just dividing down these silly lines over silly topics that really have no bearing on, the way the world's going to turn out the next 10, 20, 30 years, the world that, my child's going to inherit, children of the world going to inherit. We just get focused on this crap. It's very strange.
It's funny because I want to bet, I would say, with a past guest. He bet me, like, I was trying to talk about, like, people say things without actually having meaning behind them. Like, people just say things without any evidence. And I pulled up tweets about Pepsi being racist. And he was like, you give me some person that's saying Pepsi's racist. I pulled up 10,000 tweets of people calling Pepsi racist for a commercial ad. And I said, I bet you that, see, I was like, I proved you that people say things without knowing meaning behind it. He goes, if anybody does that now or whatever, I'll come on your show and I'll eat a hat. Well, 2 weeks after that episode was posted, Coke put up a thing. I don't know if you saw this. It was guidelines to how to be less white is what they called it. It's a
Oh my God.
guidelines to be less
Oh
white.
my God.
So I sent that to him. I was like, so when are you coming on to eat a hat? So right now we're planning on scheduling for him to come on and eat a hat. But the empathy side of me was like, the empathy side was like, I don't want to see you eat a hat. I'd rather you eat clam chowder. But we made a separate bet about clam chowder. So he was like, no, you didn't win that bet. You won this bet. I was like, dude, if you want to come on and eat a little bit of a hat, it's going to be great content. But at the same time, like, I'm a compassionate person. We can switch it to a bean soup. But it's the aspect of, like, trying not to find what makes you different than somebody, but trying to find the commonality between, trying to find a workaround. And I think that was probably Sparta's biggest downfall, was the Spartans did, when they were at conflict with someone, instead of trying to find a middle ground or trying to find an era of peace, they were like, all right, then we'll just take it by force, which kind of we still do today. A lot of people, they disagree with somebody, but there always needs to be the winner and loser. And I think that boils down to the issues with our judicial system, anything in our system of government. Whenever, when you're talking about if a person is going to spend life in prison, or if they're going to have their freedom for maybe a crime they didn't commit, why is it so much of a game? And that's because there is a clear winner and there's a clear loser. But whenever you put that template in, whenever you say there's a winner and there's a loser, people cheat.
Yeah.
And going
Absolutely.
by the honor system is something that they're like, well, that should be implied. Well, people don't like to roll by the honor system. People look at, like, same thing with surgeons, for instance. Sometimes surgeons see a certain case where, like, this person's gonna die. There's a 0.1% chance of them living. I'm not going to do it. But it's like, but you're the best surgeon. I'm not going to hurt my record. There's a compassion loss to it. There's not really, I'm here to help this person. It's more of an aspect of, how is this going to make me look? Which boils down even deeper. Kids nowadays, they're growing up and their parents are like, how that makes me look? You know how that makes me look? That kid grows up much like myself, of being like, it's not about you. It's about what I'm supposed to be. You hit this concept of, like, I believe that there's all these new challenges that we're facing, but nobody's stepping up to the plate to try and understand these challenges. Everyone's just kind of going with the basic template we've been given for so long. And it's like, we have new enemies at our forefront now. It's not trying to find them with people that we talk to on social media, but it's about these other giant companies, these perspectives that we're now starting to see with how closely they're being looked at now. Much like back in the day, there's probably a bunch of hidden perspectives we don't even know about. Probably people that, never get talked about, were never written down in the history books, and that information is lost forever, much like a species that has completely gone extinct. We might not be able to ever recreate that. Like, I just saw, I'm ranting again. I'm sorry.
No, gotta carry on. I'm enthralled.
But they had the recreations of the old Greek heroes, all the philosophers, everything that someone put their face in CGI and recreated what they look like
Scary.
off the
Yeah,
off the
freaky.
they looked, a lot of them were fucking handsome, but I was looking at it like, this is amazing because we're starting to understand a little bit more now. I mean, for a couple hundred years, we thought that these Greek statues were just white, and then someone took a bio lighting or something like that and waved it over the statue and saw that there's a light pink to it, and they're like, oh my god, these statues actually used to super bright with colors, used to be a form of expression. But we saw it as this pale white statues and thought, oh, they're just bland, but they're really good sculptors. It's like, no, they painted them, but years and wear and tear. There's hieroglyphs that are probably illegible, and trying to recreate and understand. We're trying to capture a glimpse of the past to be able to understand the thoughts and the mindset of these people that lived so far back in the day. That to me is fascinating, because that's going to truly show you how much more in common we have than we do apart.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think we touched on that in the last episode that we did together, and also at the start of the show. Like the thing is that what people don't realize is that there's never been a better time to live than today. We have got things so well to hand. Like what's the term? Is it? I think they call them preppers, like people who store things and all that.
Jerky in the basement, baby. Jerky in the basement.
Man. Jerky in the basement. So you guys got basements over there. We don't have them in Australia. Like for some reason, basements just don't exist over here. But 50, 60 years ago, before the advent of refrigeration, everybody was a prepper. Like if you weren't a prepper, you were dead. That helped particularly true thousands of years ago. Like if you were going to go, say, if you were going to travel from Sparta to Athens, it's a journey of barely, I'll put it into miles for you, it's about 90 miles, possibly 3 to 4 days travel. But if you didn't have some method of getting food along the journey and safe shelter in between that, it would have been an absolute disaster for you. So you were required to foster relationships with people at different towns, so that when you rocked up to Gear, which was probably the closest town to the north of Sparta, you could get some food there and some shelter. Then you got to Epidaurus, which is probably the next town along. The same thing again before you finally got to Athens. And let's pray that you weren't in the midst of a massive war between the two cities, whereby you'd just be killed on sight for being a Spartan. Things back in those days were incredibly tough. But when I was saying before about not avoiding anything from history, that's the real secret. If we can see it in all of its glory and all of its infamy, we will be so much more better off in this day and age, because it's very simple just to sort of think, we're better off than those guys, But no, we're not. We're exactly the same as them. We've got some mod cons, we've got marble benchtops, we've got televisions, we've got laptops, so I can talk to you in America in real time and things like that. But at the heart, at the essence of humanity, we are exactly the same as back then, and we're just as predisposed to the good they were, but we're also predisposed to the evil as well. And with all of the the benefits of modern society, and there's still a great many bad things that occur day to day. But instead, we just get hung up on you used one before, the label of white guilt. Terrible. White privilege, white guilt. These labels, they're not helpful. Every reasonable person would understand that that there's a deep and inherent and quite possibly institutionalized racism still within the world there. But to label an entire sect of humanity, white people, as having a party to that racism, it's just not helpful to everybody. All it does is make decent people like yourself and me feel guilty for something that we've never ever had a stake in, and would be absolutely abhorred by if we came across it. But the people just chuck these labels out because they don't want to deal with the real issues. It's just so much easier to say, oh, Rob, you've got white privilege, so I don't need to listen to what you've got to say.
Yeah, it's kind of like, because I understand the perspective of it too. It's like if I held a knife to your throat and I had you in this position, like I'm going to kill you, and then the knife switched into your hand and then you're going to kill me. It's like, it's kind of like we're just finding someone else to be the victim. And it all comes from the ideas of, like, even with the Greeks, what they did when they started tearing down all the Greek statues, they were like, we loved you, we did all these things, but now we're going to rise against you because we don't have a master, we don't have a creator, we don't have anybody higher than us, and we don't want anybody higher than us. So they would take down these statues of the gods. And it's like, you see where it's always looking for this patriarch figure, this one thing that you need to take down. And I don't think that's with a certain race. I don't think that's with a certain especially people of your same class as you, people in your community. I think it goes higher up where it's trying to establish the stuff, not government like anarchy, but trying to find the things that are actually controlling you, that are actually keeping you where you're at. And that is a lot of what goes on with our system and legislature. And that goes in every country, because I think it's very, very irresponsible to let a bunch of people rule themselves. If I gave a bunch of kids a fucking $30 bill or something to go do whatever the hell they want with it, they're going to buy dumb shit. It's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's an importance to having that there, but there's also a limit that should be there. And our founding fathers, at least in America, knew that. They gave limited powers, and if you look at that Declaration of Independence, a lot of it where people say it should be amended, a lot of it's fucking pretty good for being made a couple hundred years ago. And they saw a lot of this shit happening. And I don't know if it's just a coincidence, or I don't know if it's like we're just following a manuscript, but it's this aspect of like, trying to find control in yourself and then trying to find control in the world is two separate things. And I believe to find the second one, you need to uncover the first one. There's still a way that we're fighting with each other and we're making crazy ass arguments, and someone needs to pay. But I don't think the person that we're choosing to pay the price is the person that should be paying the price. The person that should be paying the price is the fact that, like, we're all in this together, but there's something bigger than all of us when it comes to the aspect of what runs this thing. And I think that's something that we need to look at. Like, maybe that's our enemy rather than the common man that lives two doors down.
Yeah.
It brings into this aspect of like, if me and you hopped into a magical phone booth that's going to take us back in time, like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. We lived back in the era of ancient Greece. What would you do? Because, like, for me, being a warrior isn't part of it. I would want to try and be as immense into the culture as possible, trying to see all these things, these theater plays, these shows, and just trying to take in every aspect of what people's minds were going through at the time. I mean, writing down the person, like I used to look at scholars like geeks. Now I look at them as heroes because of trying to log information and paint a picture for future generations to understand is something that will live on in infamy in my mind more than a war will ever. Being a hero of a war, sure, that's something to the people then, but the grand aspect of what the future is going to be able to understand and record, what we're going to be able to look at, like, was this true in the past? How many things do we have now that can be just dug up and be like, this wasn't true, this was all made up?
Yeah, well, the whole of our society, has been constructed based on, what I've had passed down from my parents, what their parents had passed down from them. It would be an amazing thing to jump into that magical telephone box and go back in time. But yeah, I'm with you. There's no way in the world I would be a warrior back then. I mean, I don't know how to handle a sword and a spear or a shield. And B, I'm certainly not built for it. If I was going up against the Spartans who'd had 20 odd years of education in that field, there's no way in the world. I think what I'd do.
Togas, bro.
Togas.
We got free areolas.
Far out. Have you tried pissing in a toga? They are the most impossible thing. So I had this toga party years ago.
Hold on a second. Hold on.
Yeah.
Oh,
no, I'll break
my
it down.
God.
So we had a toga party. So that's it. I'm going to do it properly. Okay. So I Googled how to make a proper toga. And I wanted what they call the toga pretexta, which is the toga that you get when you become a praetor. So it has I think it's a red stripe down the side of it. And it involves about 7 linear meters of cloth that are 1.2 meters wide. And I downloaded the diagram of how to do it. And it was amazing. We wrapped this thing around me and it looked fantastic. The only problem was I was drinking a bunch of beer when I got to that point. And by the time I finished wrapping it, I had to go to the toilet. It is the most difficult thing. So you wouldn't want to be sitting up there like, in the Roman Senate House, for example, like listening to Cato the Elder or Cato the Younger, like in one of these filibuster moments where he's just talking till the sun goes down. You'd be sitting there and your back teeth would literally be floating. Your ears would be leaking, thinking, my God, I need to unwrap this thing and go to the toilet. And then there's the point of, going to a Roman toilet where everybody sat side by side, shoulder to shoulder. I get a bit of stage fright when I go to the toilet and those sorts of things. I don't like peeing next to other people. I like a nice and close stall.
I can't pee in public, so that's a hard one for me.
Oh, it's the tough one. So I mean, yeah, pissing in a toga is just A, being able to, but B, being able to do it in that sort of public sort of audience. Absolutely amazing. Yeah, I'd struggle doing that.
But maybe it's the comfortability of how easy it is for you to do it now. Like it's you've learned a new way with having pants. Like for instance, in Japan, they have in the back, they have on their pants on the back a piece that'll just come down so they can just don't even have to pull their pants down. It just comes, they just unflap that thing and then they go. Same thing with our zippers. You know, back then, if you knew togas were the most advanced clothing that they had, you would just have an easy system of doing it. It wouldn't be so difficult. But it shows something as simple as that that's so complicated to us now, and we can master technology. Like, well, they could even work an iPad. It's like doesn't matter because they were advanced in other areas and other categories. That's what's so interesting is back then is I don't think I would be confined to the Greek era. I wouldn't want to just live in my city as much and easy as that might be, but I would want to be like one of these guys that would try and map the world, just trying to discover how every culture is on the cusp of something that's different. You know, is it better to be really focused in one area of expertise, or is it better to be well versed in all of it? You know what I mean? It's like
Mm.
a lot of people go, well, if you're really good at something, why wouldn't you want to be the best at it instead of like wasting time with things you're not good at? But it's like, well, you're never going to get good at those things if you don't take the time to learn it or try it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's, the option of being, I guess, there's a gentleman by the name of Strabo who lived in the 2nd century, and he wrote what's called the Geographica, which is a book about, I guess, all the different countries around the Roman Empire. And that saves the Roman Empire was the largest empire the world had seen. And he went to all the different areas. He went to, obviously Egypt. He went into Europe. I don't think he traveled to Northern Europe, but he had first-hand accounts there, and he wrote it all down. He became, quite a polymath and a very popular author in his day. But imagine being a guy like Julius Caesar. Now he's obviously very famous, and people remember him for being murdered in the Senate House there. But Caesar was one of those people that was truly a polymath. He was an absolute genius in everything that he did. Like yourself, he had fantastic work ethic, but liked to be productive. But he was not only a brilliant general, he was an outstanding statesman. He was a fantastic author. He could speak several different languages. Most of the Romans could at that sort of stage, but he was one of those guys that comes along every so often and only in one place in a generation. There's other gentlemen like that, like Alexander the Great would be another example. The Turks had Mustafa Kemal, who founded the modern Turkish Republic. Like these guys are just, to go back and to get into the circle of one of those people and see how they actually were and see how they lived. Like people put all these self-help videos up online. Like there's, everybody's a prophet these days, give them 30 seconds on YouTube. But to really go back and learn from some of those, truly masterful individuals in the ancient era, and that'd be something that I would really get down with.
I want to know how many people chose to be very, very religious, like everything they did was a thing from God or a gift from God, only because the fear that if they didn't do that, they would be accused of sorcery or witchcraft. Like how many things like
Mm.
somebody discovered fire, well, God brought down fire for me to be able to use. That's accepted into the minds back then, rather than if you say, oh, I sparked these two rocks together and created fire, oh, wizardry. It's like I wonder how many people just chose to say it was the aspect of the gods in fear that the credit to themselves would maybe put them in peril or something of that sort.
Yeah, well, that's precisely what happened to Socrates. Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens by portraying a monotheistic faith. Socrates, unlike the other Greeks, didn't have a great. Well, he was accused of not being being a heretic to the Greek religion. Plato went to great lengths to redeem his image, but he was ultimately accused of corrupting the youth by not reporting the actual gods and the religion of the day. Socrates had a very monotheistic view, very similar to not Catholicism, but that one God, and he believed in an afterlife as well. So it was a very scary thing for the Greeks. They believed that in order to be remembered after you died, you had to perform great deeds in your life, and that was how you were actually remembered in the afterlife. In fact, your afterlife was in the minds of other people, whereas Socrates wasn't scared at all. They accused him of corrupting the youth. They accused him of being sacrilegious towards the gods, and they threatened him with death. And they gave him plenty of months. They said, Socrates, look, we're not going to kill you tomorrow. We're not going to put you on trial straight away, but you've got 6 months. And he said, you know what? I've had a pretty good life. I couldn't give a stuff what you guys say. The one thing I'm not going to do is betray myself. I'm going to be true to myself. And if you want to punish me for that, then so be it. But I'm not going to sacrifice myself. I've had a long life of honor. I'm not going to give it up. So when it came down to the crunch, they put him up on court and on trial. People spoke against him, And he basically took them to task. If you ever get the opportunity to read the Apologia, which is written by Plato, and another one of Socrates' disciple Xenophon wrote another version of it. It is a rip-roaring laugh. Get a nice strong scotch, get a bowl of popcorn, and enjoy some of the best rhetoric you're ever going to see. Socrates got up, and this is in the moment of his death. He was proven guilty, and he was forced to drink hemlock, which is a herb that
Yeah.
slowly kills you. And he said, no, I don't care. And he just gave it to everybody, did not pull any punches whatsoever. That's the sort of way that you want to go out, swinging all the way.
The point of getting someone to the place where they'll die for their convictions, they'll die for the things that they believed in is a very, very, that point changes 24/7. I feel like it's a fluctuating thing throughout time. Back in the day, people were more than willing to take, a spear to the head or get their head chopped off or get hung on the aspect of they wanted to die for what they believed in. Nowadays, that's the biggest fear, saying something that might be offensive or saying something that might, get somebody's nerve pinched or something somebody doesn't agree with. And the next thing you know, they're being hung up on this social cross or something like that, where, their career is ruined or something like that. Like, I think it's going to change. I think it's going to fluctuate back. I talk about cancel culture a lot, and I think it's going to hit this point where it's going to get so ridiculous that people are going to be like, I'm not fucking like everything now. When somebody says something, I say it's canceled. Like my buddy's like, dude, I drew this picture of a unicorn. I was like, what are you, homophobic? You're saying unicorn? How dare you say unicorn? He's like, what? And I'm like, it's gonna get to that point where if you make it so ridiculous, people are like, I can't do this anymore, because there has to be a breaking point. There has to be a pushback where you're like, I'm standing my fucking foot down. Like a lot of the stuff I was rolling with, but now it's getting way too severe where it's like living in fear is not a way to live. It might be a way to evolve and might be a way to be stronger and survival, but spending your whole life in fear and missing opportunities of doing something in the aspect of you're afraid of what someone will think, there are points I see on it and there are negatives to it. It's about trying to find what is your true enemy. Is the true enemy the person that's tweeting something about cancel culture, or about how a Pepe Le Pew is offensive? Or
Oh
is
my God, is he?
well, he's canceled now. So
Shit. When did that happen?
that happened like 2 weeks ago. Pepe Le Pew got
Oh,
canceled. It's easy to cancel shit that doesn't run on TV anymore. It's like, what the fuck? Everyone's like,
God.
sure, whatever.
Well, because he was French, or I don't
Yeah,
understand. What
it
did they
was,
get? Okay,
yeah, it was,
misappropriating. Okay.
yeah. Um,
God Almighty. I heard about that. Is it Doctor Zeus as well? He's been cancelled for
my
that.
my buddy's a comic illustrator, so he was like really upset on social media, was like, how could you do, like, these are all like icons I grew up with. And I'm like, man, they're gonna find it in everything. They changed the baker from cinnamon toast crunch to little squares, and they said it was like a new idea, but it was because it was offensive because the guy apparently looked Jewish and they thought like, oh, Jewish bake, whatever. And then it's like, okay, whatever. I do not try and make everything your enemy and
Well,
trying to find your real enemy. Your real enemy, I
yeah.
believe, is the one that's in yourself, the one that you're
Okay.
conflicted with 24/7, and the one that never leaves you alone. Because the only person that is around you 24/7. I had a joke about this a long time ago when I was trying to write a stand up album that I just gave up on. But it was
Oh,
like, the best voice, like people are like, who would narrate your life? People would be like Morgan Freeman, Don Corleone, whoever. I'm like, the only person that's fit to narrate your life is the voice inside of your head, the one that's already given to you, and you would never change it because that's the only one that you can stand with 24/7, because that voice is yourself. And the reason why a lot of people are afraid of it is because a lot of people don't like to be in the same room by themselves with themselves. On the aspect of, it shows you things about looking deeper inside of yourself, that there's things that you're trying to avoid, there's things you're neglecting. The reason why when you're sitting at 3 o'clock in the morning with your hands on your chest looking up at your ceiling when you should be sleeping, and you're thinking about shit you did in the 8th grade that just makes you cringe, it's because your mind is trying to show you things to improve upon, things that you're
yeah.
supposed to be looking at. But a lot of people don't understand that that's your true enemy, is the one within yourself, because most of the people in the world aren't happy with themselves. If I ask the common person, are you happy with yourself? They're like, yeah. It's like, but are you really happy with yourself when you truly get down to the deep parts of it? And that's where I see meditation as a benefit. trying to figure out who you are is probably the biggest challenge you'll ever come across in your entire life. And this isn't new
Yeah.
information. This is stuff that's been said for years upon years upon years. Plato has even talked about that the inner demon or
Yeah.
the inner force inside of us is the most evilest force of all. And that's because it's something that keeps you from your dreams if you let it. And that is very,
Yeah.
very difficult for people to swallow and for people to understand. I started noticing it when I was looking at all these things that I thought I could never do. And I was like, the only reason I don't think I can do those things is because of the fear aspect of it all. How hard is that challenge going to be? Well, if you really want to do it, you'll go after it.
Rob, one of these days I'm going to look at your Twitter profile and you are going to have philosopher on there. I'm telling you, you're starting to really add.
Don't put that's a hex. Don't put that hex on me.
Yeah,
Good
you said
God.
that last time too. But it's funny, isn't it? Like, when you're a kid, you look at all the adults around you and you think, these guys have got their shit together. And then one day you wake up as an adult and you're like, oh my God, they had no idea. And that's the point. And I think, it feeds into what we've been saying about social media, that these people, with all this hate speech that they got on there and their speeches about being offended and all these microaggressions, they're just projecting that inner hate they actually have for themselves out there, because it's so much easier to do than actually deal with what's inside. Because if it sounds like you've done a bit of soul searching over the years, and I certainly have as well. And it's a scary thing to do, to start picking apart those things inside of you that are keeping you back, holding you back from being the person that you could be. It's the most difficult thing you'll ever do is to look at yourself in the mirror and think, I'm just lying to people, I'm lying to myself, and I'm not sure which one the greatest tragedy is there, but lying in any stage of your life, and to whomever, or to yourself, it's a great tragedy. I can relate to a story last year. I was in a job for about 8 years, and some things went through some changes in the background. Like HR had sort of come in, and they were going a different way, and we'd moved from a real sort of service model that we used to have, where we could really treat our customers like they were valued members of our business. And it went to this, just a money grab at the end of the day. They're just looking for cash. And I looked at myself in the mirror, wearing the uniform that we had at the time, and I didn't like what I was seeing. I could feel that I was lying to myself by continuing to turn up, and I was also lying to people that I developed really close relations to at work through like customers and colleagues and things like that. I went in that day and I basically handed in my notice. I said, that's it, I can't do it anymore. And the boss was very shocked. She said, oh, but your job's fine. Your job's, you're secure, you're not going. I said, I know my job's fine, but I'm telling you right now, I am leaving. And from that moment, just kept on looking for another job to get out of there, because I wasn't going to lie to myself anymore. And look, I still lie. I've got a 3-year-old boy, and believe you me, I tell him things that are broken around the house all the time. Oh, it's broken, mate. We're going to the shop. But I don't want him to use it. But these are little lies and inconsequential lies. But the real lies that you've got to watch out for are the ones that affect people's perceptions of yourself and of themselves. You've got to really strive for the honesty at the end of the day. And I think, Plato knew that, Socrates knew that. And I think it's something that we should be emulating ourselves in our day-to-day lives. If not being completely honest, stop lying. You know what I mean? There's two totally different things. Honesty can be very, very hard. At least stop telling the lies.
The easiest thing for someone to do is make a change in someone else's life rather than make a change in their own.
Yeah, spot
But
on.
instead of saying that's wrong, or instead of saying maybe that's something that we shouldn't be doing, maybe instead of looking at it as trying to change, maybe it's about understanding someone else's life. Seems to be a little bit easier, because the inherent need for people to worry about someone else is just always there. I think that goes back to our primal essence of trying to survive together. We initially want to know what someone else around us is doing for a protection of ourselves, but also a protection of the community, and a protection of you. Trying to change somebody is just a way of trying to make sure that they can survive and the mindset that you've built up in your own head. And I look at it from a perspective of what Rob Lowe said one time. And I always mention this guy because he's
Rob
very,
Lowe.
he's very intelligent and very handsome.
Beautiful man.
But he talked about how, like, him trying to keep his kids away from all the pitfalls and dangers and mistakes that he made in his own life has solidified them in a cone or in a protective bubble where they're never going to experience danger, and has left them to a life of complacency where they're just happy with what they have. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's the biggest fear. How many parents try their best to make sure their kids don't do the same mistakes that they did? And that leads them to a life of boredom, or leaves them into a life of just being in a bubble where they're afraid of anything and don't want to go after anything with the possibility of failing. And
Mm.
it really hit me because I don't have kids, but understanding from a parent's perspective of, yes, you want to make sure your kid never experiences pain, but at the same time, they need to go and venture out for themselves and be able to discover the information for themselves. And I mean,
Yeah.
I spent my whole life, I was always like kind of mistreated. I was always brought, and that's not a pity story. It's about an understanding story of where I would give the shirt off my back literally for somebody. And I saw it with, I built a koi pond at one point, and winter came and it froze. And I had all these little fish when the water was freezing. We had to thaw it out and everything. And I had all these little, like 20-cent fish that you'd get. They're called, they're like what you would feed to bigger fish.
Yeah.
And my koi fish, the ones I paid like $20 for a piece, they would not eat. And all these fish that were like starving because they were freezing and they were unfreezing and they couldn't meet, they didn't have enough energy to get up to the food. They would sit under these fish and then just slowly come up and bring them closer to the food so they could eat before the koi fish ate. And it was like something as fucking clear as day as finding maybe a deep interpretation of something where I saw that. I'm like, man, if more people thought more about others in a more considerate way than trying to string them up upon their actions for something they might have
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
might have a benefit going on where you look at like how many people, if you ask today, hey man, can I get that apple from you? It's like, this is my last apple, man. How many people would give away that last apple? But I see the side of it. How many people do you donate $1 to that say that they're homeless and you find out they're going to waste it on alcohol or they're not going to do anything to try and change their life? They're just happy accepting free money.
Mm.
There's perspectives on both ways, and that's when you see the flat
Yeah.
earthers perspectives. It's very, very hard to narrow down a final answer or trying to figure out what's real in a world that's filled with delusions and illusions. This
Yeah.
world is so hard to try and find an answer, and from studying one thing for so long and then talking to someone else that tells me everything I just studied is bullshit and all this and all this and all this, and my mind is constantly changing 24/7. I started to understand that nobody has an answer. Everything is just speculation and trying to find the best way to narrow something down, which might resonate more with somebody else. And once you can understand that, you're fucking you can understand so much more. You're not limited to this one idea. You're open to all realms of interpretation.
Yeah, yeah, it's really tough too, isn't it? There's so much distraction out there, and there's everybody. There's a person on every corner that's going to tell you the story. That they've got the answer figured out. And maybe they do for them, but I think to probably internalize those thoughts is probably the way to go. To focus more on yourself. Yeah, I mean, there's the guy on the sidewalk with his hand out asking for $1, and yeah, I mean, I've heard that. I've thought that myself. Oh, he's just going to buy alcohol and things like that. But perhaps it doesn't really matter what he does with the dollar. I think the act of giving, and your apple analogy is really good. It's not necessary to give away the whole apple, but I think if you can meet somebody halfway, you cut that apple in half. You give them half, you keep half as well. Half an apples might be enough there. But it's a really, really tough one in this world. Like everything's, there's just so much distraction. Your phone notifications are going off. You're looking to check. Who's liked my post on Twitter. Who's shared this on Facebook and things like that. And it's just all this distraction you get confused with. But I think exactly like you said, the internalization of it. Like looking within yourself. And it's funny that you got that the lesson from the fish. That's a very interesting. How old were you when that happened?
I think I was probably 19 years old, so just a couple of years
Yeah,
ago.
right.
It's funny
Yeah,
because
okay, yeah, yeah.
the water turned black, and we're like, they're dead, so we're just gonna clean out this pond. But they were still alive, so we're like, oh, koi fish hibernate, so they go down and they'll just go to sleep. They'll stay alive for months just to go through the winter, even if the ice
Yeah,
freezes and
really.
all that. Yeah, it's fascinating because we broke the ice and we're trying to clear out the water. We're like, they're still alive. Well, we cleaned out all the water, put them in fresh water, and they died an hour later because there wasn't that bacteria that's supposed to be in there in the water the new water we put in. So they ended up dying. So it was a come to like, we're never going to have a pond again moment. But it was this aspect of trying to understand. I mean, all those times I
Yeah.
spent not having those math credits, when I was sitting in that class, I would sit on my phone researching pond information, how to build a koi pond. And after months and months of just researching, I was like, let's do it. We dug a hole, built a pond, put a tarp in there, got some fish and everything. I made the first mistake of throwing chlorine in the water, trying to clear it up. And then I threw the fish in there and the fish died. So then we did it again after we put water in it and everything like that, but it was about understanding that you can find wholesome acts anywhere in the world, from a flower just trying to get a little bit of rain from a gutter or something like that. And it really, I'm not saying it's bad to try and find deep interpretations of life into small little things that might not mean those things. But if that gets you to the point of understanding something, then go ahead and be my guest.
Yeah. You've got to have gratitude. If you can't have gratitude for those little things that you mentioned, then regardless of what you get in your life, you're never going to be happy. That's an itch that is impossible to scratch. You're going to be continuously looking for more and more and more, when you just need to have a little bit of, gratitude for the small things in life, because otherwise, if you can't have that foundation, whatever you put on top of it's just going to crumble.
I think it's part and parcel. Like someone said to me, I've been saying that phrase a lot. I like it. It's like
I like it
nobody says it anymore.
too.
But I had someone say to me, they're like, where do you stand? Like, you're always the middle of the road type, and nobody likes the middle of the road type. And I'm like, I think I have the mentality of I'm an asshole, because whenever I hear somebody say something, I immediately want to be that dick that's like, well, then there's that, because I want you to question yourself. Because the fact that, like, if you could have such a definitive answer of like, this is it and that's it, you're closing your intelligence off to the aspect that there might be something else out there and it's a better understanding. So I like to always raise the question. So as much as I might agree with somebody and I might say this 100% this way, as soon as someone says it the same way I've said it, I always go, well, then there's this, because I think you should have
Yeah.
that. Much like if you are going to take a cookie from a cookie jar that isn't yours, you have that thought like it's going to be a really good cookie, but then there's that other angel on your shoulder like that would be wrong. It's like, that's what you should have about anything that you think is 100%. You need to always raise the question. And that's kind of where I kind of disagree with the religion a little bit, is that the question is still left the question because there are no answers. And I'm like, damn, it's like, that's what we're all searching for. And it's a conflict of emotions. I'm constantly like, this way, that way, this way, that way. And
Yeah.
I think it's a good way to be, because it never puts you in one spot. It keeps you constantly moving and constantly evolving. And at least being open minded is probably the easiest thing you can possibly do once you truly let that horse go. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, mate, that's the essence of diversity, And I think we said it on the last show too, that it's a word that gets thrown around so much, but that is the diversity we should all be looking for in life. Equality amongst everybody. Everybody deserves equal opportunities and everything, most definitely. But you've got to be prepared to sit down in front of somebody and have in your mind that they know something you don't know. And if that's the case, I want to know what that is. Like, I want to know what got you to the point where you are now. I want to know what makes you tick, and I want to understand the reasons why you did that. Because otherwise, I'm going to be set in my own ways. And the old saying is that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's because old dogs, they go deaf, they go blind. They can't take in more input of information. And you don't want to be like that. You want to be a student in life, continuously. You've got to keep learning, keep accessing other people's repertoires of thoughts. It's the only way you're going to improve yourself. Like if there was a human being that was born with all of the answers, well, that's great, but that almost never happens as far as I know. I know that you know things that I don't know, and I want to listen to what you have to say about it. I might disagree with it too, but that's fine. We can disagree and we can still get along. We can still have conversations. I don't want everybody to agree with me. Like, it's not even a secret to a good relationship. The best relationships I've had in my life have been built on just that little bit of antagonism, a little bit of challenge. People are, how do you know what you can do unless somebody's pushing you that little bit further at the end of the day? So no, I think you're not an arsehole at all for doing that. You're probably the most sensible person I've spoken to for a while, because you've got the right sort of viewpoint. That's exactly how you should be going about it, Rob. And I respect you for it.
My closest friend that I have questions me in everything I do. Now, it does get annoying and it does get me frustrated, but it also is kind of why the relationship kind of works, because it's an aspect of like, you're not, I always think that you should always have that question there. And the fact that some people just want someone that's always going to agree with their position, I'm like, then you're completely doing yourself a disservice. I mean,
Uh,
even the best leaders of all time, would they have been better if they had people that would question the moves that they have. You know, that's why when you see movies with someone that truly has a good relationship with a trusted advisor, it's because that person looks at things from a logical stance. Well, sir, we can't chop off all the heads of all your army people because one of them messed up. It just doesn't make sense that we won't have an army and then we're going to be way, way behind. All right. But it's like if he would have said yes, then he would have done the act. And next thing you know, you have some person that's really destroying your own progress with always agreeing with you, and fear that if they disagree, then they might be killed. You know, it's this aspect of, you might have people that you would consider people that are close to you, but are they only close to you because they fear you? You know, I heard an
Yeah.
interview with Miley Cyrus where she was like, someone really hurt me when they said that everyone that is around me is afraid of me. And it was this fear aspect of like, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to lose this. That's why, like, if I was ever owner of a company, I would want my employees to tell me my joke wasn't funny, because I believe you're being honest. I want your honest opinion, not just what I want to hear, because yeah, what you want to hear is what you want to hear. But is it better to hear the truth than something that just makes you feel good or makes you feel like you're doing the right thing? I'd rather somebody tell me how it is, tell me how it's going to be, so I can find out answers, so I can find out who I am, so I can understand that I'm not living this life as a lie, because too much of it's already an illusion.
Yeah, well, look, in history, the only people that wanted pointless yes men around them were all dictators, and they were the sort of person that, ruled with an iron fist. They dominated the situations that they're in. They surrounded themselves with lackeys who would just simply, what was that, my lord, off with their heads? Yes, of course, off with their heads. It sounds great. Raise taxes? Yeah, double them. But I can't remember a single dictator, and I'm scanning my brain, that ended up living to a ripe old age and being able to, die peacefully. Now, there's perhaps one or two exceptions in history, but by and large, if you live the life of the dictator, you're never going to know what people around you honestly think. You're never going to know who you truly are as a person, and you're never going to develop. There's no place for that sort of, mental or emotional dictatorship in this world, in this day and age. So no, you're on the right track there.
Well, Steve, you've given me enough of your time, man. Where can people find your podcast? Where can people find all your social media links to be able to look up your awesome Spartan History podcast?
And let me just say it at the start there, where you said you fell asleep to one of my episodes. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but hopefully it was a little bit like a lullaby
It was
for you.
12 hours I was in, bro. Come on. You got to give me some credit on that one. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I was like, all right, I made it halfway through Yoke.
You did very well. That show is dense. So you can find me at SpartanHistoryPodcast.com. That's my website. I'm at Spartan_history on Twitter, or Spartan History Podcast on Facebook.
I'll make sure I link it all in the description. And thank you for listening to this episode Out of the Blank podcast.